Well, so far so good. I'm hoping to put cornerstones to be on this side, on this, so hopefully I have enough strips to do it. Ooh, and it looks like I do. And I've already got my two cornerstones here. So I've got that going. Alright, so let's get busy. Let's finish sewing these right here down so we can get this thing together and see what it looks like.
Perfectly fine. I was an enlisted man. It was perfectly fine with everybody if I was never told. Everything I knew, I had to figure out for myself, and by reasoning and by observing and so on. As a weather observer, I was never part of a specific project. I was never helping design an airplane. However, you'll see in Book 3, in the appendix, since I have a master's degree in physics, I have published Hall photon theory. I believe I understand the physics of how their craft works, and we'll get to that in a later slide. But meeting them was a very emotional experience. They are naturally as afraid of us as we are of them. Some nights after I got used to the idea that they were real and that they would come around with the men, women, and children, because they have men, women, and children just as we do. And once I got used to that, then it was kind of their turn to be afraid. I remember one night, there were many nights, but one night, for example, after the deep space had arrived at sundown on the night of the full moon as usual, and this was about August 1966 in there. And the tall white guards who were experienced had brought a group of new arrivals down to show them me, what a human looks like. And I know I'm the test human. I'm an enlisted man. If anything goes wrong, they can just cut me down and we haven't missed anything, you know. And the new arrivals have to get used to talking to a human before they can be introduced to quality folk like generals and scientists, you know. So take them out, and if anything goes wrong, well, we'll just cut down Charlie, you know. But nobody's told me that. But I remember it was almost comical because some of them were so afraid of me that they wouldn't come within a quarter mile. They were out in the desert, you know, like, you know, did you see the gorilla? You know, yeah, I saw the gorilla. I'm just out there trying to do my job, right? You know, they have a very dry sense of humor. When you get to know them, they don't have contact sports like we do because they don't have the bodies for it. If they break an arm, it takes their arm 10 times longer to heal up than it does ours. If they scratch themselves, it takes their scratch 10 times longer to heal up than it does you and I. One day I was out there in the morning and I scratched myself, and I was young, and in the most perfectly ordinary fashion, I put on some alcohol and forgot about it. And the next day when they came, the scratch had already healed up. And one of the new arrivals, who was braver than the other, was talking to the guard, and they noted that my scratch had already healed up and asked if all humans were that way. It seemed to be one of the few things that humans did that they found envious. We also multitask mentally in a way that they don't. If they're doing something, they just concentrate on it. So if they're writing, then they're just really focused in on writing. If they're walking, they're focused in on walking. They're surprisingly easy to surprise when they're doing something because they just naturally focus in so well. One night, I was young, and one night I was taking the 4:30 a.m. weather report. As a weather observer, I had to get up Monday through Friday at 3 o'clock in the morning. I bunked by myself in the barracks at Indian Springs. And I had to go out there for get ready and release a balloon for 4:30 a.m. and measure the upper level winds. And as you see in my books, originally I was on my first tour duty. It was 6 weeks of TDY. They sent me back to Nellis. The guy who replaced me got compromised. The tall whites would have killed him, but the generals asked them otherwise, as I describe in Book 1. So they sent me as the replacement. Then the guy after me got attacked and burned, so they sent me as the replacement. So then they formed a committee with the tall whites and the American generals, and they decided that they would just pick one weather observer and send him all the time. They picked me. And they gave me special orders, which were secret, and sent me out there. I remember well the day my commander, a major, who wasn't a high enough rank to be told anything, I remember the day he gave me the orders. It was a Sunday. They had me working the day shift at Nellis when no one else is in the weather station. And he had to come in at noon, and the Nellis base commander and the number 2 man had to come in at noon and receive the orders from the Pentagon. And then the 2 guards and a dog had to bring the major over, and he locked the doors. The guards stayed outside, and he began reading me my orders. And he said, "Airman Hall, you're cleared to go to Dreamland anytime you want, day or night." And I thought he meant it was okay to sleep on duty. I was so new. What a place, And then when he finished reading the orders, he said, "Nothing you do will ever be classified. No one can come out and inspect you. No one can ever ask you a question. But you can tell anyone anything you want at any time if they're willing to listen to it." Okay? And then I had to sign the paper saying I understood my orders. And he said, as usual, I always say, "Do you have any questions?" And I said, "Well, will there be a cot out there? Because if I'm going to get to sleep on duty, I want a soft place, right?" And the major looked a little confused, and he said it was his understanding that Dreamland was a place, but that only I would know where that place was. And that was the first time I'd ever heard or seen tell of Dreamland. And even that was kind of emotional because, I was thinking, well, gee, what kind of place is this? Then the major had to put, my signature. The paper just said Charlie has received his orders. It was put in the top secret safe in his place, and I had to sign the orders from the Pentagon, and he took it back to the Nellis base commander and the number 2 man, and the next day I shipped out for Indian Springs. And then after that, I was just the observer. Nobody could replace me, and married men couldn't be sent out there at all. Single men could only be sent out in groups of 2 or 3, and only for 3 days and 2 nights, once, period. One of the other men who served with me that I refer to as Small Jimmy Payne in my books, he could be sent to relieve me for 2 weeks every 6 months, but only if the other maintenance people at Indian Springs accompanied him wherever he went for his own protection. But for me, I could go anywhere I wanted, provided I did so alone. I could go anywhere, up in all those mountains that we saw on the maps, anytime I wanted, day or night, and I've been up in all those mountains. If I took someone else out with me, I wouldn't have been in any trouble. It's just that the guards would have stopped the truck and said, "Well, I see you got somebody with you, Charlie," and shot him. Okay, and said, yeah, I wouldn't have been in any trouble at all, but the people who were with me would have been gunned down. The tall whites, going on with the emotions that accompany meeting them, they enjoy having fun. That's why you would see them in Las Vegas. They got bored as the devil out there in the desert. The women and kids and the young men wanted to come into town and have fun the same way that humans do, because they have emotions just like we do. The only difference is that they handle the emotion of anger differently than we do. And I believe I discussed that in this next slide. When I was a young man, if I met another young man, and we didn't immediately like each other, you might take him aside and say, there's something about you I just don't like. And then you'd beat each other up, and then you'd be friends, You'd have a good fight, and then pretty soon you'd be bonded. The tall whites aren't like that. If they ever become angry with you, they will either just go away, period, and never come back, or they will attack you. And there will never come a time where you and they are friends because now you've fought it out. You're either dead or they're gone. There's no other way. That's the way they are. The mothers love their children. When the tall white mothers came, it was very common for the mother to begin by saying to me, "Do you understand that we love our children more than human mothers love their children?" Or in other words, "Don't touch my kid or I'll kill you," right? And of course I always, on the other, if they came and they didn't say anything, then it was very common for me to begin the conversation by saying, I understand that you love your children more than human mothers love their children. Or in other words, I'm not going to touch your kid. Please be, don't take it out of me. They're very protective of their children, including the men. They'll do anything to protect their children. When they came around with the little children, you really couldn't touch the child, period. The mother you'd be facing one angry mother if you ever reached out and just touched the child. You really couldn't speak to the child in a negative fashion. You really couldn't say, don't do this. The mother, that's suicide. The mother will kill you. And if she can't do it herself, they never come alone. The guards will come help her. The tall white guards will. They're very proud of their family relationships. It was common, for example, especially the women, when they came, and they always came in groups, to begin by pointing out family relationships, if there were some, to begin by saying, the guard in the tower is my mother's sister, or my mother's son, or this is my brother, and so on. They were very proud of them. Each tall white individual was different from every other tall white individual, just like humans are all different from each other. And they were very proud of the fact that each one was separate and individual. And so when you talked about, say, like when Paula wanted to draw a picture of the tall whites, which appears on her website, and that is a very specific tall white lady and her child on Paula's website. Drawing a picture of the tall whites was kind of like trying to draw a picture of somebody from New York City. They're all different, so you had to pick a specific person on a specific day at a specific time and say that's what they looked like at that time, you see. Their nervous system operates at least 2 to 3 times faster than ours, and this lets them think and react both logically and emotionally faster than a human does. As you see in Book 3, in the chapter entitled The End of Innocence, when I was standing out there north of the Range 3 lounge, and the tall white lady whose CIA name was Pamela, when she panicked on me, she could pull her weapon, point it at me, and fire it at me so fast that I hardly had time to tighten the muscles in my throat. Because once they became angry, and they could just change emotional states that quickly because their nervous system ran so much faster than ours. They enjoyed outthinking me. One time I asked them, on one night when the teacher came with the children and the guards, because they never came alone, and the kids were playing on the tower and I'd finished my balloon run, I went over to the teacher and I said to her, and she was just a short distance away, closer than here to that box sitting on the table. The teacher was and Range 4 Harry and school bus driver and co-pilot and tour guide. They were some of the few that I felt willing to approach. Usually I preferred to stand with my feet in one place and my arms at my side. They never want to be touched by a human, and let them come in as close to me as they were willing to, and let them and leave whenever they wanted. But there were very few. There were only a few that I was willing to actually walk up to, and to where you'd talk. And I remember asking the teacher where they came from, and she said to me, "Do I know the names that they use when they talk about the stars?" And I said, "No, I didn't." And she said, "So if we told you, you still wouldn't know where we came from?" And I said, "No." And then they were all laughing because they'd outthought me. It was apparently pretty easy to outthink Charlie. And they enjoyed doing that. They enjoyed that kind of humor. And they also meticulously keep their agreements. They're like Philadelphia lawyers that way. One of the first agreements that I negotiated with them was that I would never come up behind them and scare them, and I asked them to never come up behind me and scare me. If they came and I was working, I wanted them to make some noise or something, so I knew they were there. And then the agreement was that I would stand in place when they approached me from the front, or from a direction that I could see them. And then they could come in as close as they wanted. I wouldn't close the distance. I'd just stand there. And they could come in until they felt comfortable. And if they felt like leaving, I would never pursue. If they wanted to leave, if they felt they'd come in too close or they got nervous or something that they felt it was time for them to go, I would never pursue after them. And vice versa, if they were coming in on me and I got nervous because they were getting too close, as in that episode I described in The Wayward Wind, when the alien doctor was coming in on me and it freaked me out, that if I chose to start backing off, they wouldn't pursue. They would just stop and until we'd both agreed on a mutual distance. And they kept that meticulously, and of course they expected me to keep that meticulously too. And that's how they are. The agreement they had with the U.S. Air Force was that nothing I did would ever be classified, that I could tell anyone anytime I wanted. They expect the American generals to keep that to the letter. It isn't anything special about me. It's that once they've made an agreement, that's the agreement. If there weren't something in it for them, they wouldn't make the agreement. You're never forced to make an agreement with them. But once you make an agreement with them, man, the last thing you ever want to do is to break the agreement. Each one of them is different. Some are humanistic, like the doctor. Their generals are what you expect a general to be. Each one is different. Let's see here. Let's see. I got a mouse here. There we go. Okay. In closing, I'd like to quote a few things. This I'm quoting from Paula Harris in her nice book, Connecting the Dots. This is found on pages 46 and 47. In this page, she is interviewing Monsignor Corrado Balducci, who will be speaking here, I understand, tomorrow. And Paula Harris asked him, can you quote some church fathers who suggest the existence of life on other planets? And Corrado Balducci replied, yes, there are several. And forgive me if I mispronounce the Italian names. Andrea Beldrimi, the Salesian father and servant of God, prayed for the inhabitants of other planets. And as you see, of the 16 books he wrote, one seems to deal with this topic, and the second was the recently sanctified Padre Pio. Monsignor Corrado Balducci continued quoting Padre Pio, we earthlings are nothing too. The glory of God, the Lord certainly did not limit his glory to this small planet. On other planets, other beings exist who did not sin and fall as we did. Then Paula Harris asked him, is it a grave mistake to think that you are the official voice of the Vatican? And Monsignor Balducci answered, these ideas are mine and I do not represent the Vatican. However, I'm told that the late Holy Father Pope John Paul II has seen me on Italian TV several times and follows my radio homilies. If there was some objection, I'm sure I would know. Based on that statement, I have the following observations. The situation today is kind of the reverse of the one that Galileo faced. Back then, in the time of Galileo, the church wanted everyone to think inside the box, and scientists wanted to think outside the box. Now it's the reverse. Now the church and the philosophical philosophers and so on are willing to think outside the box. It's the scientists who keep wanting us to think inside the box. It's the scientists who want to pretend that we can't travel faster than the speed of light, when I routinely saw the deep spacecraft land, having come here to Earth, traveling faster than the speed of light. I never saw anything that would lead me to believe that aliens were supernatural, that they seeded our planet. I never saw anything to believe that would lead me to believe that the tall whites wanted to create hybrids. They were very proud of the way they were. That there were wormholes in space, or that they traveled forward or backwards in time. However, their craft did routinely travel faster than the speed of light in making the deep space crossing. That I observed on many occasions. I've captured this. Now, I'm not going to talk about science today because I want to stay within my 50 minutes, and I see I got to hurry if I'm going to do it. I want to speak, but in Book 3, in the appendix, I have Hall photon theory, and I'll just show this slide to show that it's there. The basis of Hall photon theory is that I believe that inside the photon there's a third field, And there's an electric field, a magnetic field, and a third field that I call the starshine field. And I believe that if scientists were to study famous experiments like the Michelson-Morley experiment, the Waterfield telescope experiment, what's happening in outside toroidal coils, that it would be very obvious that there was way more to physics than what they're looking at, and I described it in my book. And the tall white spacecraft appeared to be the design of the tall white spacecraft knew about the existence of these other fields and used them in the design. The tall white spacecraft had an inner hull and an outer hull, and for example, and in between those two hulls were miles of fiber optic windings. Inside the Scout, in the small Scout craft, for example, I one time estimated that there might have been as much as 1,000 miles of fiber optic windings in between there. Melted fiber optics could be easily confused with the slag from an aluminum furnace. And you'll remember that Alan J. Hynek said he had like 500 samples of slag that had fallen off from flying saucers, and they were characterized as slag from an aluminum furnace. Fiber optics is typically 49% aluminum. You'll notice that in the previous presentation they mentioned that fiber optics was ceramic with plastic around it. But that plastic melts at what, 150, 160 degrees Fahrenheit. You'll see in book 2, in the chapter entitled "The Day Without View," when I observed the Scout craft, it had a meltdown of its fiber optics. And the aliens alone, without humans around, without the U.S. Air Force or whatever, worked on that Scout craft from like Wednesday afternoon till the following Monday morning, day and night. They played hell getting it to work again. And when they finally got it working on Monday morning, 2 other Scout craft came down and flew beside it to stabilize it while they nursed it back up to the main hangar to do more repairs on it. As far as I know, I'm the only human that got within a short viewing distance. I got within, 100, 200 feet of it before their guard wouldn't let me get any closer. And what they were working on was fiber optics. And inside the deep spacecraft, as I describe in book 3 in the opening chapter, The Road Home, it had taken meteor damage, and it had the same construction, an inner hull and an outer hull. And then inside the inner hull, there was it was like a cruise ship. There was a row of rooms that obviously functioned as storage for supplies, boxes and other things. And then inside that was another row of bulkheads, and then inside that was the living area. And when the meteor had come through, it had obviously struck the craft just over the left running light up on top, and had come down through at more or less a 45-degree angle, and had just blasted its way through that row of rooms that were storage rooms, and had just come in the top and gone out the bottom. And when they finally got that landed at the Mount Charleston ski area in that snowstorm, as I describe in my books, man, that was just barely holding together. They had to land. I've always felt that if the Tall Whites had had any other base area on the Earth other than Indian Springs, because of the storm that we were having at the time, that they would have put in somewhere else if they could have. But they had to land. They couldn't have stayed out in space. They told me even another 2 days, waiting for the storm to clear. And so that technology must be easily accessible for American scientists if they would start thinking about famous experiments like Michelson-Morley with an open mind. The Michelson-Morley experiment, once you realize the photon has a third field, there's no reason whatever to believe in relativity and to believe that the arms of the interferometer are shortening or anything. Now, I want to close up because I want to stay, as close as I can to my time allotment, and I see I'm getting very close. I have just a few minutes for questions and answers, and then I'll close. You've been a wonderful audience, and as I describe in my book, in book 3, I have personally seen 2 kinds: the tall whites at Indian Springs, and the ones I call the Norwegians with 24 teeth in Madison, Wisconsin. The Norwegians with 24 teeth look so much like us that If my dentist hadn't pointed him out to me, I would have never guessed it. Now, humans are genetically coded for 32 teeth, as are all mammals. Some dinosaurs had 32 teeth. No mammal has ever had genetic coding for 24 teeth. However, in a 1949 U.S. Army study, something over 5,562 people were put to death in the German death camps in World War II that were rounded up from Norway, Denmark, Germany, and Poland, who were genetically coded for 24 teeth and had slightly webbed feet. And the ones that the young man and the young lady that I met in Madison, Wisconsin, and there was a third individual that I met in Cambridge. I didn't actually talk to the third individual. They all claimed to have come here from a nearby star, possibly Bernard's star or the next star out. And their description of that star in 1962 is consistent with what is known about those stars today. The next star out from Bernard's star, for example, is believed to have a system of at least 5 planets, is smaller than the Sun, and is a reddish-brown dwarf. And in 1962, that is consistent with the description the young man gave me of the star where his home planet orbited. Yeah.
I know some extraterrestrials, but I've never known them to be stationed here.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't met the tall lights. I
Oh.
have brief memories of them.
Oh, yes?
I've met them. They're beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
They are beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, why are they here on Earth? See, I don't know that. Why are they here? Or have they been here for thousands of years?
They use the base at Indian Springs up in Area 54 for the same purposes that the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Navy use bases in the Pacific. They use them as a place for their deep spacecraft to put in, to refuel, to refurbish, and stand out to space again. They're typically in port for 2 weeks. They typically land at sundown on the night of the full moon because they're trailing the Earth in its orbit. When at sundown, you're on the part of the Earth that's trailing in its orbit, and on the night of the full moon, the moon is opposite the sun, and you're looking at a gravitationally smooth gravity field. See, and the moon is moving away from you. So for them, it's like an airplane coming in on an aircraft carrier landing. Simple as pie. Then they stay in port for 2 weeks, and at midnight on the night of the new moon, then they take off. Now, at the night of the new moon, the moon is in between the Earth and the sun. And at midnight, you're on the side of the Earth, away from the sun, and if the moon is on the other side of the Earth on the night of the new moon, you're looking at a totally open field. There's nothing in front of you. And when the deep spacecraft powered up and took off, they powered up and took off. Now, I realized that if they were in trouble or if they had an experienced pilot, sometimes you'd see the smaller deep spacecraft come in 1 or 2 nights before the new moon or before the full moon, or 1 or 2 nights after the full moon. But the large ones, the ones that are the hardest to control, or the ones with the new pilots, always came in very promptly, just like at an airport. You could watch them land and take off. There were schedules to it. They had the smaller deep spacecraft were on a schedule of 2 months or 2.5 months. A specific craft could take off from the Earth, go somewhere, I'm certain, to another star, and return in 2 or 2.5 months. Now, if the nearest star is 4 light years away, that means that they were traveling, 24, 25 times the speed of light, which didn't seem at all. One time I mentioned that to them, and nobody flinched. Didn't seem at all like ho-hum to them. So, yeah, there was. I saw a great deal that isn't in my books, or that I haven't had a time to cover in this lecture. Sure.
Do you have a clue on the nature of the fuel?
It's my understanding that there are 5 subatomic particles that are easy to produce. I'm not sure which 5, but like mesons or whatever, that put out anti-gravity. And what they're doing is creating the particle. They're building the subatomic particle equivalent of an electromagnet. In an electromagnet, you have electrons following wires. Well, what they're doing is creating particles that put out anti-gravity and using the coils to strengthen the field, just like an electromagnet does. I'm not sure which 5, but I've always felt that if our scientists at Livermore would stop telling me about how much they know and instead start running a few experiments by chunking those mesons down and the other subatomic particles around fiber optic coils, you see, building fiber optics that bend those particles and shunk them down there, that it would be a very simple matter to discover. Yeah. The guy in the back? Okay. The guy in red, and then I'll come over here on this side.
What is their concept of God?
I don't know, but as you see in my books, in the second book, when the teacher was explaining to the other tall whites that day I was up in the main hangar, and they had me standing up in front of them with chairs, although they were folding chairs, and the American general off on the left, and she was saying, and also in book 1, in the day they had me out at the Range 3 lounge, the teacher was saying to the crowd, to the tall whites, about me, she was saying he believes in God, and he believes that his God will protect him from us when we come in close. And everyone understood. And so she didn't have to explain to them religious concepts or what God was. They all understood what she meant by that. And so that's as close as they ever came to explaining anything relating to religion to me. Over here on this chat, yes, the guy in blue. What kind of reason does our government have for them? Agreement? From what I understand, the agreement is that the government will provide them with a base because the outer perimeter is manned by by human guards, U.S. Air Force guards. The inner perimeter is treated like an alien embassy and is manned by the aliens. It's physically running around about a third of the way up on that mountain. When you go up that Indian Springs Valley, and you get to the very end, it's so beautiful. It's a shame it's a government land because it would be one of the most beautiful resorts in America. I've always felt that, I mean, if you were to just blindfold somebody and take them up there and release them, they wouldn't think they were on the earth anymore because it's so beautiful. And I've been up there a number of times. When you get up to there to the right and you go to start going up along the road along the side of the mountain to where the human guard shack is, golly, it's just breathtakingly beautiful. And what the government wants is technology transfer. The government would do anything to get technology transfer from the tall whites. The tall whites only agree to things if it's in their interest. And so and in return, the tall whites get a base, you see, which they need for to service their deep spacecraft. The tall whites didn't come here to actually give us technology. It has to be in their interest. So the tall whites had no reason to tell us how to build deep spacecraft. The day that I was out there, for example, in Book 2 that I previously described, there was only tall whites working on that craft. It had been built using parts provided to them by the U.S. Air Force. However, the Air Force gave them the parts, and they assembled it, especially the propulsion system, with no human